welcome to the new series from Performance Works International, Guest Practices. I'm Jeremy Blaine, CEO of Performance Works International, and I'll be running a series of videocasts with special guests who have a story to tell from both business and life experiences. The conversations are designed to explore their journey, uncovering new ideas, innovations, and next practices that we can all learn from and be inspired by. For today's guest practices, I welcome Lloyd Wigglesworth. Lloyd is an executive leader who's made it to the very top of organisations like WHSmith and St Ives. Now, as an executive board advisor and C-level coach with the Alexander Partnership of London, he supports others at the top of organisations as they navigate the challenges of today and tomorrow. Lloyd and the Alexander Partnership have just published a new research paper called A View from the Boardroom. It features interviews with board chairs, the C-suite, on the changing paradigm for CEOs and balancing the needs of today with the needs of tomorrow. Our conversation uncovers some of the headlines coming out of the research, conclusions, and actions for CEOs and their teams everywhere. Hello and welcome to this episode of Guest Practices. This week, I'm delighted to be joined by Executive Board Coach and Advisor Lloyd Wigglesworth. Lloyd, welcome.
Hi, Jeremy.
Well, thanks for joining us. And in fact, I must say, first of all, that it's great to have you. I know that you've adapted to remote working superbly well. And you're the only person that I know that from the comfort of their own home is playing some of the best golf courses in the world. Can you explain, please?
Well, I think like many people, we've found some different things to delight us whilst being locked up. And one of the things we decided to do was, now the kids have left home and left the playroom upstairs, we've converted it into a golf swing studio and put the latest technology in. So there's a net and there's a projector and there's the ability to play golf courses around the world with your friends who are in different places. So instead of watching TV in the evenings, Fiona and I go upstairs with a glass of wine and play 9 holes at Augusta National. It's great fun.
Well, we're going to give your details at the end. So any viewers who are very interested in this and would like to get in touch for the golfarium of your own, or whatever they call them, they can get in touch. So moving on, Lloyd, for the main purpose also that you're here, I'd just like to maybe give our viewers a background of yourself. You've had a fascinating career at the very top of organisations and executive boards. You now advise executive boards and are a senior level coach. Can you maybe give us some headlines of your career?
Well, it was quite varied. I started at Mars, having had a business degree qualification. And like many people who work for Mars Confectionery, you move into other industries. And I went into food marketing, and then I ran a series of companies in magazine publishing, in retailing and wholesaling. I was on the board of WHSmith, actually, which is where I had my first experience of being coached, my first main board, and then entertainment distribution, marketing services, sat on a few different boards as non-exec director in construction and internet providers and things. So, yeah, it's been quite broad and always been fascinated by leadership. And 8 years ago now, decided, actually, if I'm going to be a coach, I need to get on with it. And so got into executive coaching, founded my own coaching practice called CEO Coaching, and then co-founded Paradox Partners. And then 2 years ago, joined the Alexander Partnership, who I'd always admired as a partnership. And there are 8 partners there. It's been a great journey. I've loved it.
Well, you're certainly passionate about the topic as well when we talk about it. And I always say, I think when you're an executive coach or you're an advisor, it really helps when you've actually done the job. You've got the wounds to prove it. You've experienced success. You've experienced failure, and there's no better way to sort of take a one step away view of the C-suite and the challenges that are there. And I guess that leads me to a very obvious question right now. What has life been like for CEOs over the last unusual and uncertain 8 to 9 months?
Wow. Well, it's been tough. I've spoken to quite a few in the last month who've said it feels like they're running on empty. And, this is the time of year when they should be coming back from holiday refreshed and raring to go for the autumn, which is such a critical trading time for many, many businesses. And they're tired, actually. They haven't been able to take a proper break. They've been thinking about the welfare of their businesses whilst they've been away. And it's been the uncertainty of everything which has worn them down. They've had to be the strong ones in this phase of uncertainty. To start with, it was all about preservation of their business. It was preserving cash. Is the balance sheet strong enough to cope with the extraordinary lockdown, which no one had ever experienced anything like that before? And then it was moving into crisis management. How could they cope with all these different working practices and dealing with very, very stressed out people, employees in the company, shareholders who are worrying, what's going to happen to the business, suppliers. Many people have supply chains which are 6 months long, and suppliers are wondering, are you actually going to accept the product that's going to come that you've already ordered? If they're a retailer and the shops are all closed, what do you do with this huge amount of supply? And of course, dealing with the board. All the board directors will be worried about their own reputations as well. So a very stressful time. It's when leaders have really had to step up and show what they're capable of. Never before have leaders in corporate life needed to step up and play the role that everyone has depended on them to play. So it's been really tough, and it's been fascinating as a coach actually to share this journey with them. And it's been very varied. I mean, not all companies have had a bad lockdown, of course. The food retailers have done incredibly well. The pharmaceutical companies have done incredibly well. But there are an awful lot where it has taken them to the brink. And, unfortunately, as we've seen, a lot of businesses haven't been able to survive it. And there are going to be more casualties coming along in the next few months.
Yes, I agree with you. And a couple of things that you said there around running on empty, and the feeling at leadership level is similar to the feeling at employee level as well. And perhaps this is the time where both the very top and the rest of the organization is looking at the same thing in the same way and becoming closer together. In fact, it reminds me of something else that you mentioned, remind me of Kevin Sneeder, the CEO of McKinsey, who's talking about right now, the focus has shifted. It's employees first, customers, and cash in that order for now. Mm-hmm. For now, because of course we're in business to do business, and that is the navigation that leaders are having to do. And one thing that I've really enjoyed over the last week or two in reading is the white paper that you've just published, A View from the Boardroom, which looks at some of this. So what was the background to getting that underway, Lloyd?
Well, the Alexander Partnership produces white papers from time to time, and we decided that it was a good time to focus on the role of the CEO before we obviously knew what was going to happen. And so we interviewed nearly 40 chairs and CEOs more chairs than CEOs because we wanted to hear what their perspective was on the role of the CEO, how it had changed over the last decade or so, and what skills they thought CEOs would need going forward. Now, of course, the interviews have taken place over the last few months, and so it's highlighted many things which it may not have come to the fore before. I mean, I think there are some interesting trends which were already underway, but I think probably what we've seen is the pandemic has accelerated many of these things. So we produced this white paper, which is freely available, and it's part of our role because we consider our role to be coaches, advisors, and guides. It's not simply coaching. Our clients expect us to have an understanding of what leaders generally think. And this was a great way of pulling together the thoughts from a very wide variety of people.
Yes, a timely piece of research. And I'm sure there are things that have come out of it, like you say, that probably wouldn't have done had we not seen this accelerator of the pandemic. In fact, COVID-19 has the biggest accelerator of digital transformation since the iPhone was launched in 2007. It just gives you a sense of where we are right now. So perhaps some of the challenges coming out of it from your interviews were more obvious, but what are some of the other challenges that have come out that are faced by leaders this year that you felt were very important to highlight in the paper? Yeah,
well, the first one is obvious, and that's crisis management. So you've talked about some of these. How bad could this be? And making some projections going forward. And of course, this has been so difficult because nobody knows the answers. But you still have to take a position. You have to make some assumptions for your models going forward. And making it, take one example is I was talking to the CEO of a large organization. One of their divisions is they do events. They put on exhibitions. So you can imagine what the lead time is of setting up an exhibition. You've got to book the venue, all the suppliers, they've got to arrange the construction of their particular setup. They've got to invite people. They've got to book flights. So if you were a betting person, when do you think it would be reasonable to tell your division to gear things up again? What is the date? And I asked him that question, and he said May of next year. And it's not based on complete gut feel. It's based on an assumption of when there'll be a vaccine, or even more important than that, what he said was it's a bit like what happened with HIV. So they didn't find a cure for HIV. What they found was drugs that enabled you to live with it without it being life-threatening for a period of 20 years or so. And in his view, that's what's actually going to be the big trigger to enable things like an exhibitions business to get back up and running, because people will then have the confidence that they will be able to travel and go to events, etc. But that's a huge call. And so the crisis management turns into projections and how long can we survive? How long can this particular division stay afloat? Do we mothball it? Do we run online events? What do we actually do? So crisis management is the first one, and putting a marker down in the sand of what do we assume is going to happen without being rigidly tied to it, and admitting that you may have to change tack based on whatever comes over the hill. One of the things that people have found so exhausting is this shifting policy and rules and regulations. And many CEOs and leaders, they came back from their summer holidays And the message from the government was, we encourage people to go back to work now. And it felt like this was a trend in the right direction for managing your people. And then overnight it switched to do not go back to work unless you cannot work from home. So it was a complete reversal and changed the working dynamics overnight. So that's the first thing, is the crisis management. But then it's visioning what the future could be. Is our business model fit for the future? You've talked about the impact of technology. And before this pandemic happened, everything was being challenged. All the business models were challenged. If we go back 10 years, there are many organizations that didn't exist. Uber didn't exist. Spotify, Netflix, Monzo Bank, none of those things existed. And one of the quotes that I thought was particularly interesting from one of the people we interviewed was, you either need to be a disruptor of the market or you're going to be disrupted. There is no steady state business anymore. And what the pandemic has done, it's accelerated a lot of trends that were going to happen before. I've spoken to a lot of young people who normally would have gone into big companies coming out of their qualifications. And these schemes, the grad schemes and the development schemes, have been put on hold, and these people are being forced to set up their own businesses. And there's no doubt some of these businesses are going to be very successful, because the young people are going to see things other people don't, and they're going to take advantage of all these different types of working and consumer behavior, which was changing but has been accelerated by it. So the leader has to be a champion of change. Once they've seen what the future can be, they have to coordinate the best thinking and become that champion of change. And they have to position it. One of the other quotes was, you need to be a peddler of hope. You've got to be reasonably optimistic as a leader, because if you don't believe in the strategy, then your people will very quickly see through that. So you have to be the leader of this change and create a culture where change is possible. And the final point I'd make on this is, you have to be the manager of stress. There is an enormous amount of stress out there, and you have to understand what's going on. You have to be in touch with your people and ask them what they need. People working from home with young children who weren't able to go to school, people who are worried about their not only the health of their parents, their children, their finances, their investments. There is a lot of stress out there, and someone has to absorb that. So the leader is the ultimate person who has to be strong, and they have to be the point of empathy for the people in the organization who are worried about all of these things. And they have to do it for their own family as well. So it's been a tough gig, but they've had to be the strong ones. And it's been very interesting being their coach, because if there's one person they can download how they're personally feeling, it's to their coach.
What I find interesting about what you've just explained is of course, this almost kind of looking ahead, the crisis management, the envisioning, the need to be able to forecast somehow what might happen in a few months or next year or so on, really with a focus for some industries, particularly on business survival. So when the leader is up here, the interesting thing that you then ended with is that there's a real kind of solid bridge now between that, but also a more empathetic response to what's happening in the rest of the organization, the need for a culture to underpin the change that needs to potentially happen, a more empathetic style. Moving on, so this moves towards a more human-centered approach as well. So there's quite a balancing act for some of those leaders, wouldn't you say?
I think it is a balancing act, being strong but being human. And I think it's one of the good things about the virtual communication is that it's forced many leaders to be more human. I mean, if I talk about my own experience of coaching some of the senior leaders, and before lockdown, we'd both be in a suit and tie, and I might be in their office, and their PA would bring in the china cups and coffee, and it's all quite formal. Whereas now it's on Zoom, although a few of them have started to meet face to face again, which has been fantastic. But it's been on Zoom, and they've been in their, shirt and sweater, and their spouse may pop in and saying, "I'm going for a jog. Can you take the bread out of the oven and make sure the kids are doing their homework?" It's you actually see them in real life, and I think people have really liked that. Actually, they've liked to see that actually leaders have their own vulnerabilities too. And I think any leader who talks and says, "I know what the future holds," actually loses some credibility, or pretends everything is fine for them, because it isn't for anybody. Actually, we've all got our stresses and strains. And I think when leaders show that they're human too, then it makes other people feel, yeah, okay, life is okay. I can give myself permission to be worried or have the odd sleepless night, or admit that I'm not coping particularly well. You don't have to put up this formal front. So I think it has been a lot of talk about the benefit of leaders showing vulnerability. I think many have had to, and they've come out with a greater sense of following as a result of that.
Yes, it's that reference to authentic leadership, isn't it?
Yes.
This kind of more human-centered approach, which we're seeing the very best are displaying right now. And I think some of the organizations who are continuing to trouble, you start looking at some of the more operational human elements, and there seems to be some difficulties there still. However, I must pull you up on china cups and coffee. I am clearly dealing in the wrong places, because this is not my experice. But good
you can
on
see
you.
what I'm drinking out of. It's
yes, I can't. I'm not showing you mine. So actually, the as you're speaking, I'm thinking that while our leaders potentially have a need to be, of course, and have the eye to the sky and the future, there's a greater need right now to have their feet on the ground. So how have the day-to-day demands for a CEO changed over this year, based on either the research that you've done or the consultancies that you're making?
Well, one trend which was very much underway already is that the role has become much more complex. I've certainly worked in organizations where it was clear that the focus was about short-term profit maximization. And lip service was really paid to anything else. It is a much more complex role now. And it came out very strongly in the survey that CEOs could not get away with just pursuing short-term profits. You have to think about local communities, the wider society, the whole supply chain, governments and regulation, diversity, climate. All of these things have to be on the agenda. And there are shareholders out there who will not invest in organizations who aren't showing what their strategy is in all of those different areas. So dealing with all the different stakeholders has made it a much more challenging job, and has meant that there's been less time for these leaders to actually spend on the operations of the business, which has meant that they've had to ensure the people around them are much more capable than they could have been before. The old command and control style of leadership is considered to be an antiquated way and a far less effective way of managing organizations now.
Yes, I'm seeing that more and more as well. And in fact, it's ushering in a rapid age of empowerment. There is an acknowledgement that certainly in the businesses that I'm talking to as well, that the leaders can't possibly do all of this on their own. There are new skill sets that are needed. There are new behaviors that need to be displayed. And a more collective approach or empowered approach may help that. But if I come back to the leaders, exactly what you're saying here, I think this need to focus more on community. I love what you said around that, the communities, internal, external communities, society focus, much broader diversity lenses, because even their workforce could shift. It could be 50%, within 2 years, it could be 50% independent workers, not just permanent workers. Yeah. So does this mean that there's different skill sets which are now required at sea level?
Definitely. I think, one of the questions we asked chairs is, what would they look for in future CEOs? And there is a general acknowledgement that, one of the quotes I loved is, you need to have a decent sized brain and supersized ears, which is, yes, you've got to have the intellectual capacity to understand the complexity. You've got to know enough about all the different functions of the business so that people can't pull the wool over your eyes. But you've also got to be a fantastic listener. Your EQ has got to be as big as your IQ, because you're the person who needs to pull it all together and get the relevant people working with each other on new ideas and see what the future is. One other thing that came through very strongly is, obviously, you've got to be resilient. And I pushed a few chairs on what do they mean? And they said, well, actually, we're looking for people who've had significant failure in their lives. And this could be careers, or it could be outside of their careers. Because if someone's experienced failure and picked themselves up and carried on and found a way to succeed, that is such a huge lesson and is so valuable. And it's one of the things that came through in the top tips is embracing mistakes, accepting we're not always going to get it right. Because if you don't make mistakes, you're probably not trying hard enough. You're probably not pushing the boundaries hard enough to understand where your business could be positioned, how far it can actually go. So rather than taking mistakes as a blot on someone's copybook, actually, leaders who have faced adversity and overcome it are seen as being very desirable for the top job going forwards.
So big brain, big ears, willing to experiment. These are really good pieces of advice, not just for the C-suite, but if we're ushering in this new, more empowering age, then perhaps that's where some of the reins can be let go throughout the rest of the organization. And I think that's not just about embracing mistakes. That's accepting that you don't need to be perfect also moving forward. Yeah. Versioning is really the words of today, isn't it? Particularly download an app where we're on version 3.4 before we even know it. Reminds me of one of the big Chinese insurance and banking companies, the co-CEO. She said that, if we're not quick, then a 70% solution could kill us. Yeah. We have to be able to move quicker, get a product to market which is not quite oven ready, but we can evolve as we go around. And that takes quite a different mindset, and it takes the rest of the organization to come along with them as they're going. So some really, really important new approaches, skills, even behaviors to be displayed at leadership level, but also at management level. One thing that I love about the paper are the 20 tips that you put at the end of it. I've been ticking these off as I'm going along, and I've been referring to them in some of my conversations as well. It's been very helpful for me as a coach as well. Thank you very much. But these to me could apply to any leader. So of those 20, because you were so in depth with some of the interviews that you did, which ones would you highlight as the most important, or that resonates the most today?
I think the first one I'd highlight is the fact that leaders need to understand that they're in a goldfish bowl. And it applies to online communication as much as anything else. You can be sure that if there's a group of people and the CEO is there, they are watching the CEO's body language. They're seeing the way they respond to whatever anybody says. People take their cue from the leader. And this isn't just what they say about the strategy of the business. This is about how they behave. This is about how they greet people, how they talk to the person on the front desk or the cleaner or whoever. We haven't talked much about culture, but culture, well, the famous saying is, culture eats strategy for breakfast. It really does. And it comes from the person at the top. So understanding that your every move is being looked at by other people, and that your style of dealing with people will be mirrored by your team. So don't behave in one way and ask your team to behave in a different way. I think that's the first one. So you need to be clear on what you stand for as a leader, and you need to act that out. I think the second one is, we talked about the wider responsibility towards all the different stakeholders. The CEO is the person who needs to go out there and find out what the different stakeholders want. There are too many CEOs who don't get out there, and they assume that the shareholders want one particular thing, or the supply chain want something. You need to get out there and actually ask, and ask regularly, because things are changing so incredibly quickly. On the people side, leaders are defined by the people they promote and hire. Diversity comes into this. And any leader who is tempted to recruit people who think and look like themselves are missing a trick. Diversity is not about ticking the boxes of gender or race or disability. It's about diversity of thought. That's why the diversity is so important. To have a really effective team at any level, the worst thing you can have, and I've seen this so many times, is you have a team where the first person who speaks of any seniority, other people think their job is to fall in behind and support them. There is an element of that, but more important than that, it's free thinking. It's people having alternative viewpoints so that the alternatives can be considered and then the best one reached. And that won't happen unless you've got diversity and people who think in different ways. What else are the most important ones? I think celebrating successes is so important right now. With people feeling unsure about the future, there's so much negative comment out there the media, it's so easy for them to talk about the negatives, and they're highlighting the number of people who died and all these appalling stories. We need to celebrate success. And certainly the leaders that I've been working with, I've encouraged them, go out and find lots and lots of examples of people showing excellence, people who've overcome the difficulties caused by this pandemic, and share them and make people feel good about things. Because the reality is that, yeah, this is a really tough time, but there are going to be loads and loads of opportunities for organizations who are fleet of foot and have the right approach to, and they're open to new opportunities coming in. They need to be given permission to do that. And I think making people feel good about the small successes is a very important thing for leaders at any level. What else would I highlight? I think being prepared to say, I don't know. And this is a bit of a new one. Leaders are supposed to be the ones who know the answers. And that was the old style of management, is your people would come to you and say, boss, I've got this issue. And you go, no problem. The answer is this, go away and do that. The modern style, the more effective style of management, is actually a coaching style, which is to say, well, you're the expert in this. I don't know the answer. Tell me what you've considered. Tell me what options you've considered. And then we'll discuss which is the best one. And that way you're developing the person. You may well have an opinion. You may say, well, I think you need to involve someone else in this to reach the right conclusion. But as the boss, to say, I don't know, let's find the answer out together, I think is such an important style to develop at any level. I would say employ a top coach, particularly if you're a senior leader. This is a tough gig. And at CEO level, yes, they have the chairman who should be acting as somewhat of a mentor, but the CEO and the chair know that at the end of the day, the chair is the person who will fire the CEO when they've reached the end of their life in that particular organization. Whereas to have a completely confidential external sounding board and guide is an invaluable thing to have. And I had one when I was promoted to my first main board, which was at WHSmith, and they helped me become a much more effective leader. Is that enough of a sell?
That is enough of a set. There's some great things. In fact, it's worth just summarizing a few things here because there's quite a lot there, but I would urge people to download this white paper. I'll ask you for that in a second, and we'll display this on the video cast for everybody so that they can go and get hold of it. But the start point to understand what do I stand for, I think, is so important. It's not just about talking the talk. It's about, as you say, it's about walking the walk and displaying and modeling those behaviors that really underpin how the culture is evolving, because culture is evolving right now. It's being impacted by digital, by workforce changes, by distributed working, by external mega and macro challenges, everything. And I think your point, therefore, about the leader becoming more consultative, collaborative internally, and gathering that viewpoint and welcoming comment, ideas, dialogue and debate among the organization at whatever level has only got to be a positive. And doing that also does another thing that you say, which is it does bring the need front and center to embrace diversity in all its lenses. I couldn't agree more with you that many organizations need far greater diversity in thinking, not the usual lenses that we talk about. And that's one way to get it, because we may be missing a trick already within our organization. And the final point that really resonated with me is how would I describe it? Catching people doing it right in a time where we are all stressed, where short term is important but long term is uncertain. Then celebrating these little wins, celebrating and creating wins for our organization, for our people, so important, and then to recognize them as well. And I think as we draw this conversation to a close, which has been a fascinating one, one final question from me. So for those C-level leaders and potentially some board chairs and executives and non-execs at that point, if they were to embrace the findings out of here and really understand some of the changes and that becoming that change agent and what that means, what are some of the benefits by getting that right? But what's the cost for those more traditional leaders of sticking with what they know?
I think if they are blinkered and don't move with the needs of their organization, I think they will get left behind. And I think they will miss an enormous opportunity. We all want to develop ourselves, don't we? We all want to be at our best. So I think we need to listen to what's going on out there. This paper is just one example, and I've listened to some of your other fantastic webinars, and I think having an open mind and listening to what other people are going through, listening to what best practice is, and working on yourself. I mean, one thing we didn't talk, which is also in the top tips, is developing good habits, and we need to be the strongest we can be if we want to be effective leaders, and understanding how you can get to that place. And I've got lots of examples of people who are, it's about health, it's about fitness, it's about diet, it's about sleep, it's about reflections. I think if people can stay open to what's happening around them, then this is going to be a fascinating decade ahead. There are people who think the world needed this pandemic to shake us up and make us reevaluate what's important to us. And I think we all need to do that. We need to ensure there's enough space in our lives to think about what world do we want in the future and what role are we going to play in it. And I think I would leave that as my final thought.
Yeah, and I love the sentiment, which is applicable to leaders at the very top, but leaders at all levels, which is, that kind of attitude of how do I become the strongest that I can be in my role as I take the organization forward. And I think it's a lovely place to end this on. So, Lloyd, I'm sure a number of our viewers would want to get in touch, have access to the white paper. How do they do that? How do they get in touch with you? How do they download the white paper?
The white paper's on the website, which is thealexanderpartnership.com. And if you want to email me directly, it's lloyd@thealexanderpartnership.com.
Well, Lloyd, thank you so much for taking the time out to give us that view from the boardroom, if you like, and the tour through the research that you've done. It's been very insightful, but also with some clear actions that the C-suite can take, and some lessons for leaders as they're moving up the ranks as well. Thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome. It was fun.
Thank you for joining our Guest Practices videocast. Please do subscribe to our YouTube channel through the link below, or check out our website to access more in our current series of expert interviews.